Hi, my friends. It's William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich series on YouTube. And we are going to be in 1908 today, which is a surprise because I think I said in the last video that we'd be doing another 1909 letter. But then I got looking through my files and came across this 1908 letter. So I thought, well, let's do that. I hadn't translated it, so I did some of that work today. It's a long letter, about 8 pages long, so it's going to take us some time to get through it. Anyway, our recap, the last letter we did was 1909. It was 19th of January, 1909, and it was mostly talking about an unfortunate incident where the King of Sweden, Gustav V, had been offended because of a misunderstanding where he'd been stopped, halted at the gates and not let through. And he had, when he was in Russia for the wedding of Grand Duchess Maria with his son, William, and so medals had not been evenly distributed to the Russian troops who had been in attendance on him because of that offense. And Dmitri had asked Maria to intervene, and apparently Maria did intervene, or asked her husband or someone else to intervene, and the king relented and sent those medals to Russia. Okay, so as I said, we're going back in time to early in 1908, and there's a little bit of confusion about the date of this letter, and I'm not quite sure what Dmitri was thinking. He gives 2 dates. So the first date he gives is 4th April, and without crossing it out or doing anything like that, he then writes next to it May 1908. And I think the May date, without the actual day, just the month, is certainly the most accurate, because if I'm not mistaken, Maria was married in April or quite early in May, and he's sending this letter to her because she's in Sweden, so he's writing to her in Sweden. So I don't see how this can be the 4th of April, and I don't know why he put the 2 different months. Anyway, the letter was written in Tsarskoye Selo, which was where he was living at that time. He had not yet moved to Grand Duke Paul's palace in St. Petersburg. He and I think also Ella were both staying at Tsarskoye Selo with Nicholas and Alexandra, or maybe not with, but adjacent to, in one of the palaces there. And later that summer, Dmitri would be traveling, visiting his sister in Sweden, visiting his father in Paris, also going to a watering place in Estonia with Ella, then going to the Crimea with Ella, and he wouldn't be settling down in Petersburg to start attending the cavalry school until September. So this is still early on. He's still in Tsarskoye. Okay, so as I said, it's a long letter, and I'm just doing the first 2 paragraphs here. So here we go. My dear Maria, I am totally slain by your letter. It's so long and interesting. I thank you a million times for it. I read it yesterday evening after returning from the Mengdens. They arranged a little dinner for me, terribly touching. There weren't many people, but among the guests were Rauch with his wife, Dmitri Sheremetyev and his wife, Knorring, the Count's belle-sœur and his sister, and also Dima Kleinmichel. I talked a long time with him. I gave him a ride home in our train carriage. After dinner, we played a rather fun card game and then had a quiet tea, and I left at 11:30. Yesterday afternoon, I went riding alone. It was rather boring. They gave me some groom who chattered the whole time. It was terribly funny. In reality, I wanted to go with Olga, but because of the first time, I wasn't allowed to. Okay, so that's all I'm doing today, just those 2 little short paragraphs. The next one is quite long. So I thought I'd better quit while I was ahead. Okay, so as I just mentioned, and as you know from the 1909 letters and the later 1908 letters, Dmitri was going to be living full-time in Petersburg. Instead of, he'd been living in Moscow since he was 10 or 11 years old. And he and Maria had been sort of kept away from people. Ella and Sergei had their inner circle, among whom were the Mengdens, some Mengdens. It was seemingly a big family, and some of them lived in Petersburg. But, they weren't in society a lot. That wasn't sort of something that Sergei and Ella did. And Sergei actually seemed to kind of like them, whatever you think of him, love him, hate him, whatever you think of him, he was undeniably a controlling person. And he seems to have kept Dmitri and Maria and his wife rather isolated there in Moscow, away from the rest of the family and away from the young people they would have known under other circumstances. So not only is Dmitri moving from Moscow to St. Petersburg, but he's learning to be integrated into society, and people are being very helpful. They're trying to, have little dinners and parties for him so he can meet people. So that's quite nice. And he is 16 years old at this time. Whether it's April or May, he's 16. He'll be turning 17 in September 6th on the old calendar. So he's got a ways to go. So in the previous video, in the 1909 letter, he'd been invited to the Buligins, an aristocratic family, and he'd told Maria that he was starting to be invited to places. But this is much earlier, and so this dinner has been arranged by the Mengdens. And as I said, one of the Mengdens was Sergei's right-hand man and the person in charge of Sergei's household, also in charge of Dmitri and Maria's finances at that time. And Paul never liked that. Paul thought Mengden was sort of helping himself to some of Dmitri and Maria's estate. But Sergei obviously trusted him, and Paul couldn't displace him. Sergei had custody. So anyway, whether or not that was the case, the Mengdens in Petersburg, I'm not sure exactly what relation with the Mengdens in Moscow, who were really en famille with Sergei and Ella, and now Ella. I'm not sure exactly how they're related, but clearly they are related. This Mengden, I believe, is Count Georgy Dmitrievich, whose wife was Irina Dmitrievna Mengden, and she had been born Sheremetyev. So these are big, prominent Russian aristocratic families, although some of them, several of them here, have German surnames or Scandinavian surnames, Swedish surnames, because of Finland and the Baltic states being part of the Russian Empire. All right, so Rauch von Taubenberg, something like that. I can't remember. So this was another aristocratic family, probably from the Baltics, I'm not sure. They were barons, and they were connected to the Horse Guards, which would be Dmitri's regiment when he graduated from the cavalry school. So we have a Baron Rauch and his wife, the Baroness. We have the brother of Irina Mengden, Count Dmitri Sergeyevich Sheremetyev. No, she couldn't have been her brother because she was a Dmitrievna. He's a Sergeyevich. I don't know. I can't keep all the relationships. Sort of sorted out. This is another big family, the Sheremetyevs, another big aristocratic family. And there were lots of them, and I don't know, but we know that that Count Mengden's sister-in-law, who was also a Sheremetyevo, I think. Is that what Dmitri says? You know, this isn't even very important, is it? And his sister, I don't know. They're there. And also this Baron Knorring, that's Knorring, which I think is probably Swedish, and he's probably from Finland. The nobility in Finland were all Swedish speakers, and yeah, had Swedish origins. Okay, and then these are all middle-aged people, you know, so it's not like a party for young people. But there is Dima Kleinmichel, so Dmitri Kleinmichel, and I don't know how old he was. You know, he could be 80 as far as I'm concerned, but it seems to me like he's the only one, you know, he doesn't have a wife. He's the only one there without a wife, except for Baron Knorring, and so he may well be a younger man around Dmitri's age. And indeed, he's looking for a ride back to Tsarskoye Selo. So clearly Dmitri had taken the train from Tsarskoye to Petersburg, and now he's going home, and he offers a lift to Dima Kleinmichel. They seem to have hit it off. They spend a long time talking with each other. And yeah, okay. Whose train carriage was it? He says, our train carriage. I wonder if it was Nicholas and Alexander's, or maybe Ella's. But anyway, he gave his friend a lift. That was nice. And then we come to this second paragraph. Certainly not the last paragraph in the book. And what's going on with this? I don't know. I'm sure I overstated it. I've referred to this text before about how Dmitri wanted to go riding with Olga, with his cousin Olga, Nicholas and Alexandra's oldest daughter. I believe she was 12 at this time in 1908, May 1908. Correct me if I'm wrong. Dmitri was 16, Olga was 12. I think that was the same age that Alexandra and Nicholas were. I think Alexandra was a girl of 12, and Nicholas was a man of a boy of 16 when he fell for her. But Dmitri is certainly not falling for Olga. Anyway, what happened? Why can't he go riding with Olga? Well, I don't know, because he doesn't specify at all. And I think I kind of read into that before, that maybe he made some kind of smutty joke or something, because that was the sort of thing Dmitri did. Or he was playing the clown, or he got her to, you know, jump a hedge or something like that. A little one, I don't know, you know, I don't know. I'm not sure, because it's much vaguer than I recalled, just because of the first time I wasn't allowed to. Okay, I don't know. They were never a thing, really, as far as I know. I mean, kind of yes or no, right? The German word jein, yes and no. The girls he just wasn't that interested in. Judging by the diaries and his correspondence, he rarely mentions them. Almost never, and when he does, it's really only in passing. In the whole of the diaries and the correspondence, he'll mention them once in a while. The most he has to say about them, really, is when he's a kid in 1906, staying in Tsarskoye Selo, and he just finds the girls to be, yes, such a trial for him, because they're, according to him, noisy, rude, ill-behaved children, especially at the table, and he just doesn't like any of them. Well, now, you know, they're older. And there was allegedly this engagement between Dmitri and Olga in 1912. It seems like it really did sort of take place. It was never formal. It was never announced. It may have been just something that was discussed. I guarantee you Dmitri was not in love with Olga. He was madly in love with the Queen of Romania. He was enjoying relationships with other women, not as much as you would think, but yeah, he liked older, experienced women. So, you know, well-brought-up young ladies were not at all what interested him, what attracted him. So in 1912, Olga was not. I can well believe that he went along with it. That he said, yes, I want to marry her, because he was ambitious. And he wanted also to, I'm sure, to cement his place as a son of the family. So, not in a bad way. She was his second cousin. So in that respect, it would have been fine. But if he'd been the son-in-law, and he'd always been kind of a surrogate son to Nicholas anyway, then, he would have felt secure in his place within the family. And I'm sure that was very attractive to him. But I just don't think there was any attraction on his part. I have no idea what Olga wrote in her diaries or that sort of thing. So as the thumbnail, I've used this World War I era photograph, I'm not sure the exact year, of Dmitri and Olga sharing a playful moment. Dmitri playing the clown as usual, Anastasia in the background smiling or laughing, and that was Dmitri. That was the way he was with everybody. But just judging by the diaries and the correspondence, he just doesn't talk about the girls. And indeed, the only thing that he says in relation to their deaths, I think writing in 1920 or 1921, whenever the Sokolov material came to light, is just wondering whether they were sexually assaulted or not while they were in captivity, and that's it. So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, if any of you have information or thoughts about that, feel free to comment. Okay, one thing that I like in this paragraph is he's talking about this groom who's chattering away the whole time, and clearly Dmitri doesn't want that. He wants to go out and ride. He doesn't want to chat with this guy. But he says, it was a bore. They gave me some groom who chattered away the whole time. And then it was terribly funny, smishno comical, humorous, not funny, strange. And that's so much Dmitri. He so much relishes seeing whatever is absurd in life and in his personal experience. Okay, what do we have next time? Well, as we continue on with this letter, we have the Spanish king giving an order to Nicholas II, and I think a uniform. And there's a dinner for the Spanish king that Dmitri describes. Within the course of the whole letter, he touches upon it. In the next section we'll do, he touches upon it. He talks about the order that's given to Nicholas II, but he doesn't. It's later in the letter that he describes the dinner itself. And he talks about his travel plans. He's going to be traveling all these different places in the summer. And so he and Maria are sort of coordinating, planning how they can spend the most time together. All right, so I'll stop there. I've been particularly rambling this evening. Sorry about that. And I hope to see you next time. Bye.